I remember the day I got the invitation, not because it was special, but because of the sharp, cold dread that twisted in my stomach when I saw her handwriting. It was a fancy card, thick ivory stock, the kind you send when you want everyone to know you've made it. The name on the envelope was mine, Eleanor. The sender was my sister, Veronica. The air in my small apartment always felt heavy, but that day, it felt suffocating. I rolled my wheelchair back slightly from the desk, letting the card drop onto the worn carpet. I didn't even need to read the details. Veronica was hosting her annual summer soiree, a meticulously planned, high-gloss event designed not for connection, but for display. It was where she showcased her perfect life, her impeccable fiancé, her soaring career, and the sheer, dazzling distance between her success and my quiet, contained existence. Veronica had always been the sun, bright, impossible to ignore, drawing all the warmth and light toward her. And I was the satellite, orbiting her life from a distance, mostly in shadow. But the shadows for me were literal now. 5 years ago, an accident, a careless moment on a rainy road that wasn't even my fault, had shattered more than just my leg bones. It had shattered my independence and sealed my fate to this chair. This party wasn't an act of sisterly affection. It was a calculated performance, and I knew exactly what my role was meant to be. I was the contrast. I was the cautionary tale. I was the visible symbol of the life she had escaped, the tragedy she could pity from her lofty vantage point. My presence was her subtle way of reminding everyone, and herself, how truly fortunate she was. My close friend, Julian, came over later that evening. He's the only person who truly sees the person behind the chair. He picked up the invitation, his face unreadable as he glanced at the gilded edges. "She actually sent you one?" Julian asked, his voice low, a mix of disbelief and concern. "Of course, she did," I replied, trying to sound indifferent, but the bitterness leaked through. "It's part of the choreography. The benevolent, successful sister inviting her poor, disabled sibling to bask in her glow. It makes the glow brighter, doesn't it?" Julian sighed, placing the card back down. "Eleanor, you don't have to go. You haven't been to one of her events since the change." "And that's precisely why I have to go this time, Julian," I said, leaning forward, the wheels of my chair squeaking slightly on the floor. I looked at the shimmering invitation, and this time I didn't feel dread. I felt a cold, sharp resolve. I'm tired of being the quiet tragedy she uses for emotional leverage. I'm tired of the pity. And more than anything, I'm tired of the way she looks at me. That look. It wasn't just pity, it was a deeper, more unsettling emotion. It was the look of a predator who has wounded its prey and now watches it struggle. There was a cruel, almost triumphant spark in her eyes whenever she glanced at my chair. Veronica didn't just tolerate my condition, she secretly cherished the power dynamic it created. She had always sought to control me, to diminish me, but now, the world had done half her job for her. The incident that put me in this chair was tragic, yes, but what followed was the real tragedy, the gradual erosion of the bond between sisters. Veronica never visited the hospital often. She never helped with the rehabilitation. Instead, she used my forced stillness as a launching pad for her own social ascent. While I was struggling to lift myself from the bed, she was posting pictures of herself signing major business deals, always with a caption about overcoming obstacles, a subtle, painful jab at my own lack of mobility. I knew the party would be a minefield of feigned sympathy and thinly veiled judgment. I knew every time someone approached me, their voice would drop to a certain concerned octave. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't just about enduring the night, it was about gathering intelligence. "So, what's the plan?" Julian asked, his eyes narrowing, sensing the shift in my mood from resignation to something far more dangerous. I tapped the wheel of my chair softly. "There is no plan yet, Julian. But I'm going to her party. And this time I'm not going as the victim." My voice was barely a whisper, yet it held a hard, metallic edge. "I'm going as an observer. I need to see her, really see her, in her element, surrounded by the people whose opinions matter most to her." I need to understand the architecture of her perfect world before I decide what piece to take apart. The party was set for Saturday, 3 days away. Those 3 days were the longest, most emotionally fraught silence of my life. I rehearsed my polite smiles, my practiced responses to intrusive questions, and the way I would strategically position myself so as not to be an inconvenience, yet still visible enough to be acknowledged. But as I sat there, staring at the invitation, the truth was stark and undeniable. I wasn't preparing for a social event. I was steeling myself for a confrontation, an unspoken battle for dignity that had been raging between Veronica and me since we were children. The accident hadn't just confined me to a chair, it had confined our relationship to this bitter, one-sided rivalry. And now, as I prepared to enter her perfect sphere, I knew one thing for certain: the time for quiet suffering was over. The stage was set, and Veronica, in her arrogance, had just made a terrible mistake by inviting her greatest rival into the spotlight. To understand the weight of that ivory invitation, you have to understand the dynamic that shaped us long before the accident, long before the wheelchair defined my life. Veronica was the golden child. It's a cliché, I know, but it was our undeniable reality. From the moment she entered the world 2 years after me, she was the brighter star, the one who commanded attention, the one who effortlessly succeeded. As a child, I, Eleanor, was artistic, quiet, and reflective. I loved books and spent hours sketching. Veronica, however, loved the spotlight. She was loud, charming, and fiercely competitive. Our parents, lovely people in their own right, never openly favored her, but the world did. Her school grades were always slightly higher, her sports achievements more noteworthy, and her friends more numerous and influential. I learned early that the easiest way to survive was to become her shadow, supportive, invisible, and harmless. But shadows, even harmless ones, can irritate the sun. Veronica never liked my peace. She didn't like that I had my own corner of the world she couldn't fully invade. Her competition wasn't about outdoing me, it was about erasing the possibility of my existence as a separate entity. If I got a compliment on a drawing, she would immediately orchestrate a performance, a dance recital, a flawless recitation, that would eclipse the memory of my small success. She was a master of the subtle sabotage, a skill she had honed since childhood. I remember when I was accepted into an art summer program I had dreamed of for years. The night before I left, Veronica suddenly discovered a passion for debate and convinced our parents that her future career depended on her attending a last-minute, prestigious debate camp that started the same week. The result? Our parents, juggling logistics and expenses, had to pull me out of my program entirely, assuring me, "There will be other years, Eleanor." There weren't. Veronica always found a way to make her needs the priority. As we grew into young women, the rivalry grew colder and more sophisticated. I found steady, meaningful work in publishing. She climbed the corporate ladder in finance, where flash and connections mattered more than depth. She saw my life as quaint, a hobby. I saw hers as a relentless, hollow pursuit of external validation. We drifted apart, held together only by the fragile thread of family obligations. Then came the day that changed everything, the accident. It was a torrential downpour, and a speeding truck hydroplaned into my lane. I woke up in the hospital with a spinal cord injury that locked me into this chair. The immediate pain was nothing compared to the slow, creeping dread of realizing my independence, my mobility, was gone. And this is where Veronica's true character, the core of her cruelty, was revealed. She didn't show up with comfort. She showed up with advice. She arrived at the hospital in an immaculate suit, carrying a folder full of paperwork. Her visits weren't about my physical recovery, they were about her own image management. She made sure the nurses and my other visitors saw her, the concerned sister, coordinating the best insurance plans and the most exclusive rehabilitation center, which she promptly withdrew me from once the initial flurry of concern faded, citing unforeseen costs. In private, the mask slipped. I remember lying in bed, exhausted and overwhelmed, and she leaned close, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Eleanor, you need to be practical now. That little apartment you had? You can't manage that. You need to come home." I resisted. I fought for my independence, desperately trying to keep hold of the little control I had left. But she wore me down, subtly weaponizing the guilt of our parents. She argued that my struggle to maintain a normal life was selfish, creating stress for the whole family. She suggested that being under their roof, while she pursued her career, was the most sensible option for everyone. The truth she couldn't hide was the gleam in her eyes when she saw me helpless. She didn't just pity me, she felt vindicated. The accident, in her twisted worldview, had simply confirmed her belief that she was the stronger, more valuable sibling. My weakness, my confinement, finally gave her the permanent, undeniable victory she had been striving for since childhood. She could now look down on me, not just from a career height, but from a moral and physical one. The wheelchair became a symbol of her psychological power over me. Every time she spoke of my future, it was framed by my limitations. You can't do that, Eleanor, because of your situation. You shouldn't attempt that, it's too much trouble for us. She had encased me in a velvet cage of supposed care, designed to keep me passive and dependent. This party, this lavish soiree she was throwing, wasn't just a social event, it was the coronation of the golden child. It was the ultimate display of her untroubled, ascendant life, juxtaposed against the quiet, contained tragedy of mine. Her success felt less like an achievement and more like a theft, a life stolen from the potential I had to abandon. So when I agreed to attend, it wasn't a meek acceptance of my role. It was the decision of someone who has finally seen their captor clearly. I wasn't going to her party for cocktails and conversation. I was going to observe the architecture of the perfect cage she had built for herself, and for me. I needed to see her pride at its absolute peak, because I knew that pride would be the hinge point for her eventual fall. The conflict between us was no longer about childhood slights or professional envy. It was about justice, dignity, and the sheer, exhausting weight of being constantly diminished by the one person who was supposed to be my kin. The truth was, the greatest betrayal wasn't the accident that broke my body. It was the emotional and psychological cruelty of my own sister, Veronica, who used that brokenness to finally secure the victory she craved. And as I started to prepare the few things I would need for the party, not just clothes, but a certain kind of cold, internal armor, I realized the time for subtlety was over. The stage was set for a dramatic, definitive reckoning. The day of Veronica's summer soiree arrived wrapped in the kind of dazzling, cloudless weather that only seemed to follow her. Her parties weren't just gatherings, they were strategic career events, packed with influential people, senior partners from her firm, powerful figures from the local political scene, and, crucially, the social elite whose approval she desperately chased. This year was particularly important because her fiancé, a man named Marcus, equally polished and ruthlessly ambitious, was being considered for a significant promotion, one that depended heavily on presenting a flawless, integrated social life. My initial resolve to attend was met with a fresh wave of manipulation from Veronica. The day before, she called, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "Eleanor, darling, about the party," she began, the word darling sounding like a well-aimed dart. "Are you absolutely sure you want to come? I mean, with the sheer number of people, and the garden terrace, there are a few steps. I wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable. Or worse, cause a scene." I immediately recognized the tactic, feigned solicitude while planting the seed of self-doubt and guilt. She didn't want me to decline out of comfort, she wanted me to decline out of fear of being an inconvenience. "I appreciate your concern, Veronica," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the anger boiling inside. "But I've already confirmed. I have my chair, and I can navigate a few steps with help, if needed. I wouldn't miss your big night." There was a noticeable pause on her end, a flicker of annoyance breaking through her composure. "Well, fine. Just, try not to block the bar, okay? Or the dance floor. We've gone to a lot of trouble with the flow this year." It was a small comment, yet it delivered a huge impact, a calculated reminder that in her space, I was simply an obstacle to be managed. This confirmed everything I needed to know. My presence was not desired for my company, but for my utility as a prop. The party was held at her sprawling, immaculate estate, nestled in the wealthiest part of town. Julian drove me, and as we pulled up the long, sweeping driveway, the sheer opulence of the scene was overwhelming. Valets rushed around expensive cars. The garden glowed with hundreds of soft, white lights. Laughter, smooth jazz, and the clinking of crystal glasses drifted on the warm evening air. Julian, ever protective, looked at me with deep concern as he helped me transfer into my chair. "Eleanor, if this gets too much, or if she pulls one of her stunts, we leave. No apologies, no explanations." "I know, Julian," I said, adjusting the shawl around my shoulders. "But tonight, I need to observe. And I need to be seen observing. Remember, my discomfort is her comfort." As I entered the main hall, navigating the polished marble floor, the shift in the atmosphere was immediate. Heads turned, conversations momentarily paused, and then resumed, but the undercurrent was altered. Veronica, standing near a towering floral arrangement, immediately spotted me. She rushed over, plastering on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Eleanor. You made it. Good, good." She gave my shoulder a quick, almost dismissive pat. "Everyone, this is my sister, Eleanor. She's been through so much, but she's a trooper, aren't you, sweetie?" The word trooper felt like a muzzle. It was her way of defining my struggle and dismissing the years of pain in one condescending, public gesture. She introduced me to Marcus, her fiancé, who offered a brief, strained smile, clearly viewing me as a potential complication to his perfectly curated evening. For the next hour, I played the role she had assigned me. I sat near the periphery, offering quiet smiles to the well-meaning strangers who approached with questions about my recovery. I noticed the details, how Veronica corrected Marcus's posture with a discreet gesture when a senior partner approached, how she managed to hold 3 separate, high-stakes conversations simultaneously, seamlessly transitioning between genuine warmth and professional ruthlessness. But the real drama unfolded subtly on the faces of the people who knew the family story, the whispers that followed me, the slightly too long gazes. I wasn't just observing Veronica, I was observing the court she had built around her, the edifice of her success. And I noticed one very crucial detail: 2 people, a younger couple named Sarah and Thomas, who were guests of Marcus's boss, seemed particularly uncomfortable whenever Veronica interacted with me. They weren't just politely sympathetic, they looked genuinely distressed, exchanging nervous glances whenever Veronica patronized me. They seemed to possess an awareness that went beyond standard pity. The emotional pressure intensified as the evening wore on. Veronica kept directing people toward me, explicitly using my condition as a tool for generating sympathy points. "You see, Mr. Henderson," she'd say to a potential client, gesturing towards me as if I were a tragic centerpiece, "Eleanor's experience reminds me daily to focus on what's truly important: family. It drives my ambition, knowing I have to be strong for those who can't be." Each time she spoke this way, I felt a tremor of white-hot anger, but I held it inside, letting it solidify into a cold, hard purpose. I was allowing her to build her stage higher, knowing that the higher the ascent, the more devastating the fall. I let the pressure mount, absorbing every slight, every condescending glance, every patronizing word, understanding that this was the fuel for what was to come. Then, as the night hit its peak, the music louder, the champagne flowing freely, Veronica and Marcus took center stage to deliver their engagement toast. This was the moment of their ultimate triumph, the picture of perfection. As I watched her raise her glass, her eyes shining with triumphant pride, I realized that Veronica needed one last, grand act of control to fully cement her sense of superiority, one final display of her unchallenged dominance. She needed to remind me, and everyone else, of my place, especially when she felt the most exposed in her moment of glory. The subtle cruelty was about to escalate into something much more overt and destructive. The engagement toast had just finished. The crowd, lubricated by expensive wine and buzzing with congratulatory chatter, surged forward to offer their well wishes to Veronica and Marcus. Veronica was radiant, basking in the glow of attention. This was her element, the epicenter of influence and adoration. I, Eleanor, had positioned my wheelchair near the edge of the sprawling marble patio, close to the French doors that led back into the house. It was a strategic retreat, allowing me to observe without being constantly intercepted. I had hoped the night would end quietly, but I should have known Veronica wasn't finished. She never was. As people began to move toward the garden dance floor, Veronica spotted me. She detached herself from a group of guests, her smile slightly strained, clearly determined to manage the optics of the entire evening, including my departure. She walked over, Marcus trailing slightly behind, looking irritated. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dropping to that falsely intimate tone she reserved for maximum manipulation. "I think it's time Julian took you home. You look tired, sweetie. You've been through a lot, and this noise isn't good for you." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, delivered in a way that publicly framed her as the caring sister managing my fragile condition. She reached out, placing a hand on the back of my wheelchair's handle. "I can call Julian, Veronica," I said calmly, already reaching for my phone. "I'm fine." "Nonsense," she chirped, ignoring me. "It's faster this way. I'll just get you to the hallway, and Marcus can grab your friend." Before I could protest further, she began to move my chair, pushing it abruptly and too fast toward the French doors. She wasn't guiding me, she was propelling me, treating my chair, and by extension, me, as an object to be moved out of the way. The patio floor was smooth, but as we approached the threshold of the doors, the transition to the indoor flooring required a slight, careful lift over a barely visible ridge. It was a movement that required attention and respect for the person in the chair. Veronica had neither. Instead of pausing or using the small ramp mechanism I always brought, she simply rammed the chair forward. The front casters caught on the ridge with a jarring, sickening lurch. The sudden, violent stop jolted me forward against my safety belt, causing a flash of pain in my already vulnerable spine. I gasped, the pain momentarily stealing my breath. "Veronica! Be careful!" The noise of the small collision drew a few curious glances from nearby guests, including Marcus, who was watching with a frown. Veronica leaned down close, her face tight, the public smile replaced by a flash of genuine, unmasked impatience and fury. "Oh, honestly, Eleanor," she hissed, too low for the general crowd to hear, but loud and sharp enough to feel like a slap. "Must you always be so difficult? Just stay still and let me handle it. You are literally just sitting there." Then, in a catastrophic display of her simmering resentment and impatience, she gripped the handles and exerted a strong, sudden force, not lifting, but shoving the chair hard over the ridge. The impact was tremendous. My body wrenched backward, my head snapped, and the chair, instead of correcting, tilted dangerously to the side. The sudden, reckless motion was too much. For a horrifying second, I felt myself losing balance, tipping sideways, fighting the safety straps that were the only thing preventing a disastrous fall onto the hard marble floor. It was a moment of pure, devastating terror, the shock of the physical violence compounded by the sickening realization that my own sister had done this. It wasn't an accident. It was the deliberate, careless overflow of her contempt, a physical manifestation of her desire to destroy my composure and dignity. Thankfully, the chair didn't fully overturn, but the harsh tilt threw my few belongings, my small bag, my water bottle, scattering across the polished floor with a loud clatter. The music didn't stop, but a pocket of silence immediately bloomed around us. Several nearby conversations died instantly. I was left gripping the armrests, trembling, my face flushed with pain and overwhelming humiliation. Tears of shock pricked my eyes, but I fought them back. I felt utterly exposed, not just physically jostled, but emotionally violated. Veronica froze, her face cycling rapidly through shock, then panic, then settling on an expression of performative distress. She didn't check if I was hurt. She checked the audience. "Oh, my heavens, Eleanor! I am so clumsy," she exclaimed, loudly enough for people to hear. She immediately bent down, not to me, but to scoop up the scattered objects, her movements quick and frantic, trying to erase the evidence of the scene. "I am terribly sorry. It's just a silly little lip. Did you hurt yourself?" "No, I'm sure you're fine. It was just a little wobble." "A little wobble." She had nearly dumped me onto the floor in front of 50 people, and she dismissed it as a little wobble. The air was thick with tension. Marcus rushed over, not to comfort me, but to grab Veronica's arm and pull her away from the developing disaster. "Ronnie, stop. Let the maid pick that up. Get a hold of yourself." I sat there, utterly immobilized by shock and searing indignation. But as the initial wave of shame receded, a different, colder sensation took root. My gaze lifted past Veronica's flustered face and Marcus's annoyed one. I looked out at the silent witnesses. Many were staring, their expressions a mix of confusion and mild curiosity. But then I saw them, Sarah and Thomas, the young couple who had seemed so uncomfortable earlier. They were standing closer than I realized, their eyes wide, locked directly on the scene. Their faces weren't curious, they were horrified. And in that moment, as Veronica continued her loud, panicked apology meant only for the general audience, a realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, colder and sharper than the jolt of the chair. She had pushed me. She had done it out of malice, impatience, and arrogance. But in her haste to dismiss me, to shove me out of her perfect picture, she had forgotten the one critical rule of public cruelty: she didn't expect witnesses who would see the true intention behind the act. In the humiliation of that moment, the entire world shifted. The victim's tears dried up. The plan for revenge, which had been a vague, cold thought, crystallized into a burning, absolute necessity. I knew, with the certainty of fate, that Veronica had just made the gravest mistake of her life. The sound of Veronica's frantic, false apology was a blur. The metallic scrape of my fallen water bottle still echoed in the sudden quiet. But I wasn't listening to her manufactured distress or watching Marcus trying to steer her away from the scene. My focus was entirely on the small cluster of people standing nearby, their expressions frozen in genuine shock. Specifically, I looked for Sarah and Thomas. They were still there, perhaps 10 feet away, and their eyes were not averted in polite discomfort. They were locked onto mine, and in those few, charged seconds, I saw a reflection of my own shock, quickly followed by a flash of profound, undeniable outrage. They hadn't just seen the chair tilt, they had witnessed the look in Veronica's eyes right before she shoved me. They had heard the vicious whisper, "You are literally just sitting there." They had seen the deliberate intent behind the clumsy accident. They were not family friends, easily swayed by Veronica's narrative. They were professional contacts, guests of Mr. Henderson, Marcus's superior, whose approval was crucial for Marcus's advancement and, by extension, Veronica's future power. Their presence was completely unexpected, and their perspective was untainted by history or familial loyalty. The realization hit me with exhilarating clarity. Veronica had been so focused on managing the larger crowd, the clients, the socialites, that she had completely overlooked the specific, high-value witnesses standing right in her orbit. They weren't just random partygoers, they were the Achilles heel of her perfect social structure. As Veronica pulled away, still murmuring loudly about the tricky flooring, I forced my hand to stop trembling and lifted it slightly, catching Sarah's eye. I offered the smallest, most controlled shake of my head, a silent signal that said, "I know what you saw. And thank you for seeing it." Sarah, a tall woman with dark, intelligent eyes, subtly nodded back. It was a minuscule movement, almost imperceptible, but in the chaos of Veronica's bluster, it was a covenant. A silent agreement that the truth had been observed. I had come to the party with a vague, cold determination for justice. But now, I had the evidence, and more importantly, I had the independent observers. The abstract desire for revenge transformed into a tactical, executable plan. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the anger settle into strategy. My first action had to be immediate and non-confrontational. I needed to solidify their witness status without tipping off Veronica. Veronica, having regained a semblance of composure, was now directing attention to the dance floor, trying to restart the celebratory atmosphere. The immediate crisis was over for her, dismissed as a minor incident involving poor, fragile Eleanor. I maneuvered my chair slowly toward the outside garden path, pretending to seek fresh air. My true target was the table near the perimeter where Sarah and Thomas had left their drinks. I rolled slowly, casually, until I was near them. "Excuse me," I said softly, addressing Sarah, who immediately turned to me, her expression still marked by concern. I apologize for the scene. This old chair sometimes gives me trouble. It's embarrassing." I framed it as an apology for my inconvenience, mirroring the narrative Veronica wanted to establish. This was my hook. Sarah leaned closer, her voice low. "Please, Eleanor. Don't apologize. It was completely unacceptable what happened. That was not the chair's fault." She glanced quickly towards Veronica. Thomas stepped forward, his fist slightly clenched. "We saw the whole thing. It was deliberate. I can't believe she did that." I kept my voice light, yet firm. "I know. It's just family stress, I suppose. Listen, my ride, Julian, is pulling up soon. Before I go, I'm in publishing. Do either of you happen to have a card? I might need a contact for some future professional advice." It was a perfectly innocuous, professional request in a setting full of networking. It gave him a reason to interact with me without raising suspicion. Sarah quickly reached into her small purse. "Of course. I'm a project manager for a major architectural firm. Here." She handed me a card. Thomas did the same. "I'm in corporate law, Eleanor. Please, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate." The subtle emphasis on anything told me he understood the true nature of the potential assistance. I held their cards tightly, carefully slipping them into my shawl pocket. "Thank you. Both of you. It was truly a pleasure meeting you." My eyes held theirs for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, a silent thank you for the truth, and a promise of what was to come. As Julian arrived, pulling his car up to the front, I let him help me away, leaving Veronica to her party. I didn't glance back. The humiliation had been intense, but the harvest was complete. On the drive home, the initial pain and shock faded, replaced by a crystalline clarity. My sister, Veronica, in her endless hunger for status and control, had sought to crush my dignity in front of her most important peers. She had succeeded in the cruelty, but failed catastrophically in her calculation. She had given me two things: a motive fueled by unbearable pain, and a means, two credible, unbiased, high-standing witnesses, to deliver a strike that would shatter the facade of her perfect life. My revenge would not be loud, emotional, or physical. It would be quiet, meticulous, and delivered directly to the very foundation of her carefully constructed success. Veronica had pushed my wheelchair, but now, I had the leverage to push her entire world off balance. The moment Julian's car pulled away from Veronica's grand estate, the cold, silent work began. Julian, usually outspoken, respected my silence on the drive back. He saw the shift in me, the shock replaced by a terrifying calm. I was no longer the wounded victim, I was a strategist. Back in my quiet apartment, I didn't rush to ice the small bruises forming on my ribs or even check my texts. I went straight for the two business cards tucked safely in my shawl. Sarah, the architect, and Thomas, the corporate lawyer. These were not just names, they were the keys to dismantling Veronica's edifice. The next morning, the whispers started exactly as I anticipated. Veronica began her cover-up immediately. My phone blew up with messages from my mother, Martha. Martha's messages were a perfect reflection of Veronica's spun narrative. "Oh, Eleanor, are you all right? Veronica feels terrible about tripping. The flooring really is treacherous. She was so worried you were upset. Please don't hold a grudge, darling, you know how clumsy she is when she's stressed." There was the carefully crafted excuse, clumsiness, compounded by stress. The focus was entirely on Veronica's emotional well-being and managing the family reaction, not on my pain or dignity. My father, Robert, called, his voice heavy with the exhaustion of dealing with Veronica's emotional fallout. "Your sister is very fragile right now, Eleanor. She's worried this might somehow reflect poorly on Marcus's career bid. You understand, don't you? Just let it go." It was an accident. The message was clear: my dignity was expendable for the sake of Veronica's ambition and the family's peace. They were applying tremendous emotional pressure, hoping to squash the incident before it could become a problem. They didn't even consider the possibility that it wasn't an accident. They were conditioned to see Veronica as the good-hearted, if occasionally high-strung, sister, and me as the sensitive one who needed constant management. I responded to them all with a detached politeness that offered no ground. "I understand, Mother. I'm taking a few days to recover. Please tell Veronica not to worry about me." The calm tone was designed to reassure them, but beneath the surface, the revenge plot was taking shape, cold and precise. I knew I couldn't afford an emotional response. Veronica expected tears, screaming, or dramatic accusations, reactions she could easily dismiss as the oversensitivity of the poor, fragile Eleanor. My revenge had to be silent, effective, and untraceable back to an emotional fit. It had to look like justice simply happened to her. My strategy was built on 3 pillars: credibility, timing, and leverage. First, credibility. I needed Sarah and Thomas. I needed to know exactly what they saw, and I needed to ensure they understood the gravity of becoming involved. They couldn't be co-conspirators, they had to be unwilling, but crucial, witnesses to the truth. I waited until Monday morning, giving myself time to appear recovered, and giving Veronica time to think the immediate crisis was over. I sent separate, professional emails to Sarah and Thomas. The email was simple: "Dear, name, thank you again for the card the other night. I hope your experience at the soiree was positive. I wanted to reach out regarding the incident involving my chair. I believe you may have seen something crucial, and as a safety precaution, I need to officially document the events for my personal records. This may impact my need for further accessibility provisions." I never mentioned Veronica, only the incident. This was corporate language, appealing to Thomas's legal mind and Sarah's professional ethics. I requested a brief, private meeting for documentation. Both replied almost instantly, agreeing to meet. Their quick response confirmed their moral outrage was genuine and that the memory of Veronica's cruelty was still fresh. Second, leverage. I realized the true weakness in Veronica's armor wasn't just her mean spirit, it was her absolute, desperate reliance on status and reputation, specifically related to Marcus's career and his boss, Mr. Henderson, who was present at the party. Marcus's promotion hinged on integrity and flawless public image. A story of a high-status couple callously abusing a disabled family member would destroy them professionally, rendering their perfect life imperfect in the eyes of the people whose judgment mattered most. Third, timing. The plan couldn't be a messy family brawl, it had to be a surgical strike delivered right before Marcus's promotion decision was finalized. I needed to introduce the truth into their professional ecosystem just as their reputation was under the most intense scrutiny. Julian, my trusted friend, came over that night, and I laid out the strategy, whispering the details like a general planning a military campaign. "I won't accuse her directly, Julian," I explained, moving my chair slowly around the room. "That's what she wants, a battle she can win by spinning the narrative. Instead, I'm going to create an undeniable record of the truth, documented by witnesses unconnected to the family. And that record will find its way to the only person who can truly dismantle her world, Mr. Henderson." Julian stared at me, seeing the cold, focused resolve that had replaced my pain. "You're going to use their own ambition against them." "She used my injury to secure her position," I responded, my voice flat. "I will use her cruelty to destroy the foundation of that position." She pushed my wheelchair in front of her most valuable contacts, assuming they would dismiss me as the crazy, sensitive sister. She didn't expect them to have a conscience. She didn't expect them to be the lever I need to shut her down completely. The revenge wasn't about violence or public humiliation, it was about exposing the rot beneath the gilded surface of her life. Veronica wanted to be seen as the benevolent, flawless social architect. My revenge was simply to make the right people see the architect of cruelty she truly was. The meticulous planning had begun, and the first step was meeting with Sarah and Thomas. The phase of gathering the threads required the utmost precision and emotional control. My meetings with Sarah and Thomas were scheduled separately, held not in my home, which might signal distress, but in neutral, professional settings. I chose quiet cafes where we could speak privately, ensuring the atmosphere was closer to a confidential business discussion than a tearful confession. I met with Thomas first, the corporate lawyer. He arrived punctual and reserved, clearly taking the meeting seriously. "Thank you for taking the time, Thomas," I said, setting my tone immediately. "As I mentioned, I'm documenting the incident involving my chair. I need an accurate, unbiased account of what transpired, purely for my records." Thomas looked relieved that I wasn't demanding a grand confrontation. He leaned forward, his professional demeanor giving way to genuine moral indignation. "Eleanor, I won't mince words. I saw everything," he confirmed. "When Veronica pushed your chair, it was not an accidental bump. I was standing maybe 5 feet away. I heard her say something cutting right before she exerted force. It was calculated impatience. And when she bent down, her primary concern was clearly the optics, not your safety. She was trying to manage the narrative of the event." I took meticulous notes, typing everything into a document on my tablet. I didn't editorialize or offer my feelings. I simply asked clarifying questions, focusing on the factual details, the distance, the verbal exchange, the visible force used. "If this information were to become public, Thomas," I asked carefully, "would you be willing to confirm the facts as you've stated them?" He paused, knowing the implications. His firm had dealings with Marcus's company, and his involvement could create professional friction. But the memory of Veronica's cruelty seemed to override his caution. "What I saw was wrong, Eleanor. If this were a legal case regarding negligence or assault, yes, I would confirm my statement. It was a failure of duty of care, at best, and intentional harm, at worst." That was the crucial commitment. Not a promise of friendship, but a commitment to professional truth. My meeting with Sarah, the architect, offered a different, equally vital perspective. Sarah, working in design, was acutely aware of spatial details and human movement. "I keep thinking about the sheer carelessness," Sarah told me, shaking her head. "Veronica didn't just rush you, she forced your mobility aid over a threshold without regard for the physics of the chair or your stability." I saw you gasp, Eleanor. I saw the look on her face. It wasn't panic, it was annoyance that you were an impediment to her perfect doorway. Sarah added a critical piece of testimony. She confirmed that Marcus had seen the incident and had immediately focused on pulling Veronica away, showing no concern for my welfare. This established Marcus's tacit complicity in the cover-up. I asked Sarah to write a short, signed statement confirming her observations, framed professionally as an incident report. She agreed without hesitation. With Thomas's verbal confirmation and Sarah's signed report, I had built a watertight, triangulated account of the event, completely independent of the family's denial. The emotional preparation for the strike. The process of gathering this evidence required me to revisit the humiliation and the pain of the push repeatedly. But instead of letting the pain defeat me, I used it as a focusing lens. I had to remain cold, analytical, and perfectly detached. Julian, seeing my intense concentration, worried about the toll it was taking. "Eleanor, you haven't slept properly. Are you okay? Don't let this consume you." "I can't let it go, Julian," I admitted, closing the folder containing the statements. "She thinks she won. She thinks I'm home, crying, nursing my hurt feelings. If I react emotionally, she dismisses it. If I react professionally and strategically, she is powerless. The pain I feel right now is the energy source for the justice I am about to deliver." My emotional armor was reinforced by the clarity of my moral objective. This was no longer just about personal revenge, it was about exposing a systemic cruelty that had defined our relationship for decades, culminating in a public act of abuse. The final, essential thread I gathered was intelligence regarding Marcus's promotion. I used an old contact in the financial world, someone Veronica wouldn't suspect, to confirm the timing. The decision was scheduled for the end of the month. This gave me a small window. I needed the truth to surface precisely 1 week before the final vote, allowing maximum time for the information to circulate without giving Veronica time to craft a counter-narrative. With the statements secured, the emotional core hardened, and the timing confirmed, I created a single, concise package. It contained Sarah's signed report, Thomas's corroborated testimony, written as my personal notes from the discussion, and a detailed, clinical description of the event. Crucially, the package ended with a simple, unnerving question: is this the integrity and empathy we expect from the future leadership of your organization? I wasn't sending it directly to Marcus or Veronica. That would start a fight. I was sending it to the one person whose judgment they couldn't control, Mr. Henderson. He was the judge, the jury, and the executioner of their professional future, and he had been a silent witness to the immediate aftermath of the incident. The strike was ready. I felt a terrifying blend of fear and absolute, icy satisfaction. The time for whispers was over. The setting for the public exposure was not a court, not a social media feed, and certainly not a confrontation between two sisters. It was the polished, utterly professional environment of a high-stakes, exclusive corporate dinner, a setting where Veronica and Marcus were meant to shine brightest, organized 1 week before Marcus's final promotion review. My contact in the finance world had provided the crucial detail: Mr. Henderson, Marcus's boss, was hosting a small, discreet dinner for the firm's top decision-makers. It was a final, private vetting of Marcus's character and social standing before the vote. This was the moment of maximum leverage. On Tuesday, exactly 1 week before that dinner, I executed the surgical strike. I sent the discreet, professional package, the witness statements, the incident report, and the unnerving question about integrity, via confidential courier directly to Mr. Henderson's private office, marked personal and confidential, incident review. I knew the formality and discretion would ensure he read it, especially given the weight of the promotion decision looming. Then I waited. The silence was heavier than any storm. The fallout began not with a bang, but with a crack, a fissure in Veronica's perfect composure that spread through the family network. The first sign came late Thursday night. My mother called, but her voice wasn't laced with the usual emotional maneuvering. It was panicked, high-pitched, and truly fearful. "Eleanor, what have you done?" she demanded, skipping any greeting. "Mr. Henderson called your father today. He asked specific questions about the party. About your chair." I maintained my icy, detached tone. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mother. I only provided documentation of the incident to protect myself." "Documentation?" "He said something about witnesses. Sarah and Thomas. Veronica is hysterical. She said you're trying to destroy her reputation." This was the confirmation I needed. The truth had landed directly where it needed to be. The quiet, professional delivery had bypassed all of Veronica's defenses. The climax arrived 2 days later, not at the corporate dinner, which Marcus was suddenly disinvited from, but in a frantic, unauthorized visit to my apartment. I was expecting them. When the loud, frantic knock came, I unlocked the door remotely and rolled my chair back into the center of the living room, ensuring I was calm, centered, and firmly in control. Veronica burst in first, followed by a pale, visibly shaken Marcus. She wasn't wearing her designer clothes, she was in a rumpled shirt and jeans, her face stripped bare of her usual meticulously crafted charm. She was weeping, but not from sorrow, from pure, unadulterated rage and terror. "You venomous, selfish little thing," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You didn't just document it, you weaponized it. You sent that garbage to Mr. Henderson. Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed everything." Marcus finally spoke, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Eleanor, this is industrial sabotage. Retract the statements now. Tell Henderson they were exaggerations. Tell him it was a misunderstanding, or I swear, we will sue you for libel." I fixed my gaze on them, letting the years of banked resentment and the recent wave of humiliation fuel my resolve. I remained perfectly still in my chair, the picture of quiet dignity. "Sue me?" I asked, my voice dangerously low and steady. "Sue me for presenting documented, witnessed facts? Tell me, Marcus, which facts were untrue? Did Veronica not push my wheelchair into the threshold? Did she not call me difficult and impatient while nearly tipping me over? Did you not stand there and focus only on covering her mistake rather than asking if I was hurt? Veronica stepped closer, her face contorted in a mask of betrayal. I said I was sorry. It was an accident. I was stressed. We are family, Eleanor. You should have come to me privately. Privately? I challenged, my voice rising slightly, but still controlled. When did you ever respect privacy or sincerity, Veronica? Every act of yours, from childhood until that party, has been a calculation of control. You didn't push me accidentally. You pushed me because, in your moment of glory, you needed one last, visible reminder that you were superior, and I was just an obstacle to be moved. You wanted to hurt me, and you chose the most public, humiliating way possible. I paused, allowing the sheer weight of the truth to settle in the silent room. And you are absolutely correct, Veronica. I weaponized it. You provided the weapon, your own monumental cruelty. And you provided the ammunition, two perfectly unbiased witnesses who saw the soul of a monster beneath your expensive veneer. Marcus grabbed Veronica's arm, his own professional future dissolving before his eyes. We need to go. She's already done the damage, Ronnie. Veronica wrenched free, her eyes streaming, not with guilt, but with the agony of lost status. You cannot do this. This promotion, this life, it's everything. You can't just shut it down because of a little push. It wasn't a little push, I corrected her, my final words like hammer blows. It was the culmination of a lifetime of betrayal. And now, the people whose opinions you valued most are seeing the genuine architecture of your character. I didn't destroy your life, Veronica. You built it on sand, and your own malice was the earthquake. As they stumbled out, Marcus pulling the hysterical, broken Veronica behind him, the silence returned. But this time it was a silence of profound victory. The beautiful, polished world they had constructed was not just damaged, it was irrevocably exposed. The golden child's triumph had become her downfall, not through fire or fury, but through the cold, calculated delivery of truth into the hands of those who demanded integrity. The aftermath of that confrontation was swift, brutal, and utterly silent on my end. I didn't need to lift another finger. The truth, delivered with the weight of two credible, external witnesses, did the rest of the work. The dust settled over the family, revealing fissures that had been long masked by Veronica's dazzling, demanding presence. Within 48 hours, the rumors hardened into fact. Marcus was not only denied the promotion, but the reasons cited were vague enough to be professionally devastating, concerns regarding judgment and ethical alignment with company values. The impact was immediate. Marcus, whose entire identity was tied to his professional ascent, was furious. His initial anger was directed at me, but it quickly fractured toward Veronica. He realized that her unmasked cruelty, exposed at her own high-stakes event, had cost him everything. The engagement, the foundation of Veronica's perfect future, shattered. I heard the details through Julian, who received the gossip via his professional contacts. The separation was cold, messy, and financially damaging to Veronica. Marcus wanted to save his own reputation by distancing himself completely from the source of the ethical concerns. Veronica had built her entire sense of worth on being the flawless partner of an ascendant power player. When that status was destroyed, her social standing evaporated. The same people who had basked in the glow of her summer soiree were now quick to whisper the truth. The story of the callous sister pushing her sibling's wheelchair in front of corporate elite became a cautionary tale, a social virus that ruined her reputation faster than any public shouting match could have. Her professional life, too, began to unravel under the pressure of the scandal. Who wants to invest their trust in someone whose private character is so fundamentally lacking in empathy? The family divide. The effect on my parents, Martha and Robert, was the most painful, yet necessary, aspect of the fallout. They could no longer dismiss the incident as a momentary lapse or clumsiness. Mr. Henderson's call had forced them to confront the severity of Veronica's actions. The corporate world, the world they valued and respected, was telling them that their golden child was a moral liability. They were torn. My mother's attempts to mediate and demand a truce failed spectacularly. She couldn't reconcile the perfect daughter she had championed with the ruthless woman exposed by objective witnesses. My father was heartbroken, realizing his enabling of Veronica's competitive nature had allowed her cruelty to flourish unchecked. They tried to force me to apologize, arguing it was the only way to save the family unity. "Eleanor, please," my mother pleaded over the phone, "tell Veronica it was a mistake. Tell Marcus you misremembered the force. You're destroying her life." "Mother," I said, quiet and firm. She almost put me on the floor to clear a path for her party. In front of her most important guests. What I gave them was the truth. If the truth destroys the life she built, then that life deserved to be destroyed. I am not responsible for her actions, she is. I refuse to engage in the endless cycle of guilt and cover-up. The family, as they knew it, was irrevocably divided. They had to choose: continue defending the golden child who had betrayed my dignity, or finally acknowledge the victim they had always minimized. For the first time, the spotlight of scrutiny was solely on Veronica, and they had to face the uncomfortable reality of her true character. A quiet justice. For me, Eleanor, the feeling was not one of wild celebration or giddy revenge. It was something far deeper and colder: justice. The years of quiet pain, the constant minimizing, the relentless pressure of being her shadow and then her prop, it had all been validated. My suffering was no longer a personal, internal tragedy, it was a consequence of her deliberate malice, acknowledged by the outside world. I didn't rejoice in the destruction of Veronica's life. I simply felt the immense, heavy satisfaction of true balance being restored. She had used my weakness to achieve her dominance, I had used her single moment of unmasked arrogance to bring her dominance crashing down. The removal of Veronica's constant, critical presence was like the lifting of a massive psychological weight. I finally had the space to focus entirely on my own life, my own path. The wheelchair still defined my mobility, but it no longer defined my narrative. The person confined to it was no longer a victim waiting for permission to live. I didn't speak to Veronica after her furious visit. I simply existed, quietly, in my space, allowing her self-inflicted storm to rage outside. The ultimate revenge was the fact that I was finally free, while she was trapped in the ruins of the perfect life she had destroyed with her own hands, exposed to the world that had once adored her. The year that followed the exposure was one of quiet, profound reconstruction. Veronica's implosion was complete. She lost her job, lost her fiancé, and, most tellingly, lost the magnetic pull of her social circle. She attempted to relocate and rebuild, but the truth of her character, the incident of the wheelchair push, now a legendary mark against her integrity, followed her like a permanent shadow. Her life, built entirely on external validation, could not sustain the weight of public knowledge of her internal cruelty. For me, Eleanor, the consequences were liberation. The weight of being the victim, the silent observer of my own diminished life, was gone. The resolution wasn't just about my sister's downfall, it was about the reclamation of my own dignity. The energy I had spent managing her expectations and deflecting her slights was now invested entirely in my own pursuits. I finally achieved the independence I had fought so hard for after the accident. I used the security of my own small savings, combined with a newfound resolve, to move out of the area near my parents and into a fully accessible apartment. I returned to my first love, art. I started painting again, creating large, evocative pieces that were not about sorrow, but about resilience, color, and sharp, defined edges. Julian remained my steadfast support, not as a caretaker, but as an equal. The experience had galvanized our friendship, turning it into an unbreakable alliance. We started a small online platform showcasing my art, and for the first time in years, I felt a success that was entirely my own, genuine, earned, and utterly untainted by Veronica's influence. My parents and I reached a tense, but necessary, peace. They realized they had to choose between their gilded image of Veronica and a genuine relationship with me. Slowly, painfully, they began to accept the reality of the situation. Their visits became fewer, but they were no longer about managing me, they were about connecting with me, the person, not the tragedy. The division had been necessary for my own health and independence. The long-term consequences. The long-term impact on the family was a stark lesson in the durability of cruelty. Veronica remained estranged. She never apologized, not truly. Her occasional, brief communications were always filtered through self-pity, blaming me for her fate rather than acknowledging her actions. She proved that some people are so consumed by their own sense of entitlement that they cannot recognize their own betrayal. But for me, the long-term consequence was freedom. The wheelchair was still a part of my life, but it had ceased to be the central character. The central character was me, Eleanor, the woman who learned that silence is not weakness, and that true revenge is not about inflicting equal damage, but about achieving a justice that allows you to move forward while the perpetrator remains trapped in the consequences of their own actions. My story is not about physical strength, but about the immeasurable power of moral leverage. Veronica thought my disability made me weak. She assumed my quiet demeanor meant I lacked the courage to fight back. She mistook my containment for surrender. The moral undertone and reflection. This story is a reflection on the treacherous line between ambition and malice, and the ultimate cost of betrayal. We all strive for success, but when that success is built on the deliberate diminishing of others, especially those closest to you, it is not a strong foundation, it is a ticking clock. Veronica's greatest mistake was not the push itself, but the arrogance of believing that her influence could erase the truth, that her status shielded her from moral judgment. The lesson I learned, the hard-won wisdom I carry with me, is this. Cruelty is self-destructive. When you betray someone, particularly someone vulnerable, in a moment of arrogance, you are not harming them alone, you are leaving a permanent, indelible mark on your own character that the world will eventually see. You cannot expect respect and success in the public sphere if you practice contempt and cruelty in your private life. Justice, I discovered, doesn't always come with a loud crash. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, professionally, delivered by the unbiased hands of those who simply refuse to ignore the truth. My ultimate victory was not seeing Veronica suffer, but finally being able to look in the mirror and see a survivor who fought for her dignity and won, proving that even from a position of profound vulnerability, you can dismantle the most polished facade of betrayal and emerge into a new dawn, unbroken.